Hello, everybody. This is Tom Simmons, and I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to Lent this year because we're going to work on increasing our confidence and clarity with the gospel. That's our theme. Now, there are a lot of skeptical people who Jesus wants to draw closer to himself. There's skeptical people all around us in our neighborhoods, in our workplace, in our marketplace. There's probably skeptical people in our families. There might be even a skeptical person inside of you. And in Lent, we are going to get to know one particular skeptical person. His name is Charles Murray, and if that name rings a bell, it's because he's a renowned intellectual. And he was educated at Harvard and MIT, and he's written the latest of a long series of books called Taking Religion Seriously. It's a very compact 160-page book that tells his journey from secular agnosticism to Christian faith. And we're going to learn what persuaded him. As an intellectual, he takes a very heady approach, and the influences that nudged him one step at a time over about 30 years, the fascinating lines of scientific and historical evidence that convinced him step by step to embrace a Christian faith. We're going to dig into the Big Bang Theory. We're going to learn more about near-death experiences. We're going to learn about the impact of Christianity on society and the ethical transformation it has wrought in the world, and how reliable the Gospels are in their witness to Jesus. These are the things that brought Charles Murray into the fold of Christian faith. We're going to gather on Wednesday nights in Lent for our Lenten Supper series, and we're going to discuss these lines of evidence and influence on Charles Murray, and we're going to learn how to assimilate this material and to share it with others, all right? Because, hey, maybe you could lead the next Charles Murray to Christian faith. And to kick it off, I'd like to give you a chance to get to know Charles Murray just a little tiny bit through an interview he did with Andrew Klavan. And if you want to see the whole interview, you can go to dailywire.com and the Daily Wire YouTube channel. There's a lot more of Andrew Klavan and what he likes to describe as Klavan-y goodness there, as well as the whole Daily Wire crew. A lot of good content. So let's get started.
Hey, everybody, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Charles Murray. He has written a new book, which I am into, but I have not quite finished yet. But I can say it is equally fearless and also deeply personal and just a terrific read. It's called Taking Religion Seriously. It is well worth taking a look at. Charles, it's good to see you again. Thank you for coming back.
Good to see you again. Good. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. It's been a while. And I have to tell you, I was not expecting this book from you. It took me off guard, and I was really excited by it when I saw it in the Encounter catalog. I sent for it right away, and it's gripping. And I want you. I had a very similar experience of being, in a class of people, in a group of people who dismissed religion entirely, so that I didn't really think of it in a serious way. You call this dead center. Can you explain to people, especially to people who were cradle Christians, what dead center was for a person in your situation?
Dead center, I think, is shared by millions and millions of well-educated, successful people for whom religion has been irrelevant. In my case, I went to church as a child, to the Presbyterian Church, but I got to Harvard in 1961, and I quickly learned that smart people don't believe that stuff anymore. And I wasn't persuaded of that. That was just in the air. That was the zeitgeist. None of my friends were religious. None of my professors were religious. People treated it dismissively, and I went along. And it was not that I was hostile to religion, but for the next 25 years, I just didn't think about it very much. And I was working out of a catechism, a secular catechism.
Real quick, before we hear about his first turning point in this journey with his wife, let's take a moment to talk about that secular catechism that was, for him, dead center of his worldview. What he means by that is he never reflected upon it. He just assumed it to be true. He absorbed it by osmosis from his peers in college and the intellectual environment in which he lived. And I think that's true of a lot of people. And it was certainly true in my case, where I was very nominally raised as a Christian, baptized and confirmed in church on Christmas Eve. But the real influence in my life was through my schooling, through the media that I consumed, through the peers that I was around. And that was all secular. It was all influenced by agnosticism and skepticism about Christian claims, and kind of an immediate eye roll and shrug and like change the subject. This is where a lot of us come from, and this is where a lot of people around us still are. What's fascinating to me is how they claim to have these high moral and intellectual credentials for their unbelief, but as Charles Murray demonstrates, you scratch a little bit below the surface and there's not much there. It's pre-reflective. And so we can, as we think about persuading others, be confident that that is where a lot of them are beginning. So let's get back to hear how his wife influenced his conversion.
You talk about a turning point that comes from your wife, which is also not that uncommon, this one spouse or another having an effect. Can you talk about where that came from with her?
Sure. It was decisive.
Yeah.
In the book, in the acknowledgments, I mentioned that Catherine, my wife, has edited everything I've written since the 1980s. But this is different. She's the only reason I had anything to write about. Catherine had our daughter, Anna, our first child, in 1985. She was just like me. She'd grown up Protestant, had fallen away from it, hadn't thought about religion. And a couple of months after Anna was born, she came to me and said that she loved Anna more than so much that she had a hard time telling where she stopped and Anna began. And she also then came up with a wonderful line. She said, "I love Anna far more than evolution requires," which is the kind of line that somebody educated at Oxford and Yale will come up with. Say, I understand evolution. I believe in evolution. I know that women love their children because we've evolved to. Something else is going on here. And she thought she was a conduit for a greater love. And that prompted her into eventually Quakerism. And she has become a very serious Quaker, which doesn't mean a social activist. It means deeply spiritually involved in the Christian faith. And I couldn't follow along. And this is raises something, Andrew, that I think that what people who ignore religion have a hard time understanding is that a great many of us, including me, are perceptually deprived. I mean, we have no problem believing, we meaning agnostics who don't care about religion, we have no problem believing there's such a thing as being tone deaf. We have no problem believing that some people who may have very high IQs don't get great paintings. But we have a hard time understanding that it may be we are the equivalent of tone deaf when it comes to religion, that we are lacking the ability to enter into a certain kind of sensibility that other people are better at. And in my case, my wife was good at it. I'm really bad at it.
But you you were in the Peace Corps famously. I think it was Thailand you were in.
Right.
And you had kind of experimented with Buddhism. So you knew you must have felt there was some mystery beyond what we know, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were just fooling around.
I was attracted by meditation. And one of the reasons I was attracted by meditation was that it was trendy in the 1960s. But also, I was perfectly willing to believe that people can enter into other kinds of mental states. You know, I believed in hypnosis and other kinds of things. And I really wanted to do that. And I was also attracted to Buddhism, Andrew, because I was told Buddhism doesn't require you to take anything on faith.
Yeah.
That if you get in a meditative state, you will have insights about how the world works, and lo and behold, they correspond to Buddhist teachings. And that's what I want. Something where I don't have to make a leap of faith.
It's funny. I did a lot of Zen.
So you can see the influence that Charles's wife, Catherine, had in subtly turning his thoughts toward the possibility of faith, the possibility of something more than just what you touch, taste, see, and hear around you in your environment, a material universe, that there has to be, perhaps, possibly, something outside of that. She had that influence. And what I want us to realize in this course is that we have influence too. You have influence in the lives of the people around you, and your Christian faith has influence that could help them turn toward faith as well. And of course, with Charles, it was a multi-decade, he's still journeying process. Sometimes it happens faster, sometimes it takes that long. And the confidence and clarity that we want to gain in this course is that you have some role to play along that journey in the lives of others. And it's interesting to see how many little steps he took along the way. He turned onto the path of exploration that led him first to Buddhism and many other steps along the way. But then where? Well, we're going to see here it led him with her to a Quaker meeting house that we are all familiar with here in Purcellville. It's the Goose Creek Meeting House in Lincoln, about 4 miles east of here. So let's resume the video and hear that story.
Your wife to Quaker meetings. And for those people who don't know, Quaker meetings are kind of odd. I mean, you just sit there silently, and every now and again somebody feels moved to say something, but you don't really have to believe in anything, do you? I mean, you don't have to.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the reason Catherine could go there, because she really had trouble with the Nicene Creed, with the Apostles' Creed. And she just didn't want to go to a service where she was asked to recite that, because she couldn't do it in good faith. And Quakerism is sort of halfway between Unitarianism, where people believe in one God at most, as a friend of mine once put it, and mainline Protestantism. So most people who go to Quaker meeting are attracted to Christian teachings, and a fair percentage of them are Christians in their doctrinal beliefs.
Right, right. So was that, if you have a perceptual deficit and you go to a Quaker meeting where you're supposed to sit there and wait till the spirit moves you, does that put you at a disadvantage?
Well, I'm afraid I sort of semi-cheated, which is I would read the Bible. Because whereas you aren't supposed to take a thriller with you to read, it is okay to, instead of sitting in quiet contemplation, to read the Bible. So over the course of the 1990s, after I started going to Quaker meeting regularly, just because I wanted to participate, I did a lot of reading in the Bible. I know the Bible pretty well by this time, Old Testament and New.
And did that have an effect on you?
Not really.
Okay.
The nudges I got that moved me toward faith were the kinds of things that I'm good at intellectually. And the things I'm good at intellectually is exploring new topics and being receptive to new topics. So in this case, the Road to Damascus moment was really a little book called Six Numbers by Martin Rees, who was the astronomer royal, and is not himself religious. It's a book for lay people on the anthropic principle.
Mm-hmm.
And that may not be a familiar term to many people who are watching. It refers to something that physicists started to find in the 1970s as the Big Bang theory had been verified and they were exploring the nature of the Big Bang more carefully. And it's hard to summarize this in a non technical way, but I'll try. What they essentially discovered is that along with all the things they could predict from theory about what happened in the first few fractions of a second after the Big Bang, there were a variety of other things that happened that they couldn't predict by theory. They were like settings of parameters. Say you've got 30 settings on a big board, and in effect, those settings had been set at extremely precise levels that permitted stars to form, that permitted galaxies to form, that permitted planets to form. And if any of those had been a little bit off, none of that would have happened. We wouldn't live. The universe would be black holes, it would be radiation, it would not be the universe that permits life. Well, that is not theory, that's simply true. And you won't talk to any physicist who will deny it. And so this posed a real problem. Are we supposed to believe that we lucked out in a 1 in a trillion chance? Because that's the odds against our universe existing. Or are we to believe that there are millions of universes just like this one, which is the multiverse theory,
Yeah.
which I have a real hard time accepting. That doesn't seem real plausible to me. Or is it more plausible to say that it was an intentional universe, that some force had something in mind? And for me, that's really the only plausible way to think about it. There's a wonderful analogy that Canadian philosopher came up with. Suppose that you were supposed to be executed by 100 expert marksmen, and they all missed. Well, in one sense, you'd still be alive. So you could say, well, it doesn't matter how it happened, I'm still alive. But you'd be entitled to be curious. And the plausibility that they all missed by accident and that some higher authority directed that they all miss doesn't seem like a close call to me. Well, once you admit we live in an intentional universe, that opens up a whole new range of possibilities.
Yes, indeed, it does. And this is an early part of his journey we're going to talk about in our second session when we gather on March 4th. We're going to talk about those 6 numbers, those universal constants, and how finely tuned they have to be to allow us to live. So this phrase, the anthropic principle, here's how a good way to understand it. Think of yourself standing on your porch on a cold evening here in the month of February, and you're standing on planet Earth, looking out at the vastness of the universe and saying, how am I alive here now? Because yeah, it's cold. How cold is it? Let's say it's 20 degrees, but the temperature range in which we live here on planet Earth is like 120 degrees. And think of the variation of temperatures outside the atmosphere of our little tiny planet across interstellar space. The extremes of hot and cold are, let's just say, considerable. And yet, all of that, from the farthest galaxies to the location and the rotation of the moon around the Earth, are all working together in some way to make it so that we live within a 120 degree temperature range here on Earth, so that we can live here. The chances of that happening by random are very great. What are the odds? Well, he uses the illustration of a 100-man firing squad of expert marksmen surviving the firing squad. I'd say it's far greater, that all of these universal constants are so finely tuned to such narrow tolerances that it allows us to live here. Now, the secular catechism says that this is just a random occurrence, that there's no intelligence guiding the universe. That book, 6 Numbers, persuaded Charles Murray that the chances of that are awfully slim, that someone, the likelihood of someone tuning it is quite high. So that's just the first line of evidence that began to open up his mind to the possibility that the secular catechism is wrong, that it's not all random chance, that there has to be someone fine-tuning the universe to make it so that I can stand on my back porch and marvel at the vast expanse of life. Now, there are other influences that he discovered, like what he calls terminal lucidity and near-death experiences, which persuaded him, which demonstrate scientifically that you can't reduce human consciousness to the brain, because these provide evidence of brain function after death and cognition, terminal lucidity, even in people who near death, as they approach death, all of a sudden they return. Someone who has been stricken by dementia for years, in the day or 2 or 3 before their death, they wake up from that dementia and are able to identify the people around them and have lucidity before they die, even though their brain has been ravaged by decline and dementia. Their soul is still there. That convinced them that a human being is more than just an animal, that consciousness is more than just the brain. And that led him then to consider the New Testament, its witness to Jesus, the Gospels and the epistles of the New Testament, how these documents are written within 30 to 40 years of Jesus's life. And there's no other figure in ancient history, in the ancient world, who is so well documented, so close to the end of their life. The internal evidence of these documents point to very high reliability, and they convinced Charles Murray that we can trust their witness to Jesus, and through their witness, embrace Jesus by faith and join Christian community and identify as a Christian. Now, we're going to be unpacking these and discussing them and making sure that we understand and can articulate them to others if we're given the chance. In the 5 weeks of Lent on Wednesday nights, I invite you to join us at Trillium Farm at 6:30 for dinner, and then discussion at 7. We'll have you on the road by 8. And you'll get a lot more out of the course if you pick up the book, Charles Murray, Taking Religion Seriously. We're going to read the introduction and the first 2 chapters and discuss those when we gather on our first session, which is February 25th. Hope to see you there.